A lot happened in Major League Baseball during the 1990s and early 2000s. The game expanded to Colorado in the Mountain West and to a desert region in Arizona. Florida, now one of the country's great population centers, established two Major League Baseball franchises, one in Tampa and one in Miami. East Asian players entered the major leagues, reflecting a new set of global interconnections. Where and how ballparks got built evolved. The labor dispute between owners and players that occurred in 1994 caused a dip in fan attendance, but by 1998, the fans were back to the ballpark. The way baseball was played changed during the 1990s. Teams used more relief pitchers. The number of home runs and strikeouts per game was on the rise. Batters wanted to hit home runs, and more than ever before, many struck out trying. This is John Bodden, Professor of History, and today I'm going to examine baseball in the 1990s and early 2000s, retro ballparks, league expansion, and what many have dubbed the Steroid era. Before I get into the interesting 1990s, I wanted to pause and reflect on something that occurred at the end of the 1980s and during the early 1990s. A widespread fascination with the value of baseball cards. Children and grown-ups shared a growing interest in sports memorabilia. Conventions were organized and held that brought fans and players together. Retired players such as Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays might show up to a sports collectors convention, and for $20 per person, fans could meet the Mick or say, "Hey kid," exchange a word or two with the star, and then walk away with an autographed ball or baseball card. New markets emerged for all kinds of sports memorabilia, and business was booming, at least for a little while. Children in the late 80s carried copies of Beckett's Baseball Card Guide with lists of values for the cards from different decades. And they debated which cards in the present time would be worth hundreds, if not thousands, in the future. And you'll recall from a previous lecture that the company Topps had begun manufacturing baseball cards continuously since the early 1950s. So Topps baseball cards had been in stores for decades at this point, and now some of those cards from the 1950s had become valuable because they were scarce. People willingly paid thousands of dollars for a rookie Mickey Mantle card. And collectors in the late 80s and early 90s thought that the same thing would occur 3 or 4 decades down the line. Collectors started buying box sets of cards. And seeing the good business that Topps was doing, other companies, Fleer, Donruss, Upper Deck, they wanted a piece of the action and started printing their own baseball cards. So suddenly there was all of this new competition and production. And all of this new production increased the number of baseball cards in circulation. Unfortunately, for those who imagine future riches, baseball cards had become abundant, and prices for new cards and even not so new cards collapsed. Well, I think the baseball card craze it's expressed the nation's inner entrepreneur. Millions dreamed of riches before the speculative bubble popped. And perhaps there's something even more quintessentially American about the craze, and that would be a boom and bust cycle, one hallmark of the country's market capitalism. The 1990 U.S. Census revealed something remarkable. More than half of the country's largest cities were now located west of the Mississippi River. The populations of Detroit, Philadelphia, and Chicago had declined since the previous census, while cities out west had only grown bigger. Today, 7 of the country's 10 largest cities are west of the Mississippi, and 6 of them are either in California or Texas. During the post-war era, millions of Americans moved from urban cores to suburbs, and by the 1980s, many downtowns were suffering from decay, neglect, crime, and various social problems. Suburbanites, for their part, often looked at their downtowns as places of despair and danger. And so that's why Camden Yards, built for the Baltimore Orioles in 1992, was such an important landmark, a trendsetter. Before Camden Yards, most Major League Baseball teams played in multi-purpose stadiums used for football and baseball, not ballparks like Wrigley Field in Chicago or Fenway Park in Boston. which both stadiums having been built in the early 20th century. Well, the designers of Camden Yards wanted to harken back to the early 20th century. They liked the stadiums that were built then, and they wanted something that was asymmetrical. They wanted something downtown, not necessarily right next to the interstate, and something that would be exclusively for baseball. So the city of Baltimore had other hopes for the project. The idea developed that this ballpark could play a part in reviving restaurants, clubs, and residential living in the area and create a vibrant entertainment district. Well, pessimists said, no, people don't want to go downtown anymore, suburbanites won't come, and, well, the naysayers were wrong, and the success of Camden Yards was something that made it widely emulated across the country. New stadiums in Denver, St. Louis, and New York City drew inspiration from Baltimore, but so did smaller cities, regional cities, Buffalo, New York, Oklahoma City, Birmingham, Alabama. They all built attractive ballparks in their downtowns, and these ballparks have facilitated a process of economic revitalization. Without delving into who benefits from such projects, I'll simply say that urban ballparks have helped bring more affluent people to lofts and condos in the downtown, and this reflects a growing preference that we see in American life for walkable neighborhoods and various entertainment options. A preference not for the suburbs, at least among young professionals, but for the core. Major League Baseball expanded during the 1990s to the country's new population centers in the West, South, and Southeast. Two new franchises came to Florida, now the country's fourth most populous state. Denver and Phoenix became Major League cities the same decade when the states of Colorado and Arizona posted growth rates of 30 and 40% respectively. As a point of comparison, Pennsylvania and Ohio had growth rates of 3.4 and 4.7 respectively. Well, so Nevada, to give another example, Nevada, the fastest growing state in the country during the 1990s, was also keen to recruit a Major League Baseball team from a struggling market, perhaps. And briefly, Las Vegas contended to attract the struggling Montreal Expos. Now, ultimately, the Expos relocated to Washington, D.C. after the 2004 season and now play as the Nationals. But I think it's safe to say, it's fair to say that no one's going to be surprised if San Antonio, Portland, Oregon, or Las Vegas become Major League cities. And these cities are all west of the original core of Major League cities. I want to make a couple of comments about Major League Baseball in Colorado. First, massive crowds showed up for games during the inaugural year in 1993. People were excited about Major League Baseball well before the construction of a ballpark exclusively for baseball, Coors Field. So fans came to Mile High Stadium, home of the Denver Broncos, a football team, and this stadium had a seating capacity of 70,000. And so the Rockies drew more than 4 million fans, a Major League record, their first year. And we might pause, too, to say that this part of the Mountain West had become a great economic center in the decades since World War II, with more than 4 million people living along a corridor stretching from Fort Collins in the north to Colorado Springs in the south. And the same kind of thing could be said for the greater Phoenix metropolitan area. It had boomed in the last 50 years. Well, more on the Rockies. The Rockies built a beautiful stadium in downtown Denver, influenced by Camden Yards. And the stadium had many amenities and was close to mass transit, so it reflected these new trends and priorities. More significantly, at least for how the game of baseball is played, the high-altitude air had a marked impact. First, it was a spacious stadium located at 5,200 feet above sea level. The thinner air made it harder for pitchers to throw curveballs, and the thinner air also meant that the baseball carried further. So many fly balls to the outfield became home runs. So Coors Field, very immediately, it became apparent that Coors Field was a hitter's park, but its park factors were remarkable. And not to get too technical, but its park factor of 138 means that Coors Field produces 142 runs for every 100 runs produced at the average Major League Baseball park. 135 home runs for every 100 home runs produced elsewhere. So a lot more runs scored at any given game in Colorado. And we've talked about the Astrodome's artificial turf that benefited base runners, or the stadium's indoor air favoring pitchers. Well, now there was a single park in the major leagues with conditions that dramatically favored hitters in just about every respect. And there's been a lot of conversations about, how should we evaluate the statistical achievements of players who spent large parts of their career in Colorado. And the larger point would be to understand history is to understand context. And truly the same can be said for baseball. Well, we've already talked about the dip in Major League Baseball attendance following the 1994 strike. Commentators wondered if fan attendance might not return to pre-strike levels. Well, it did. In fact, since the early 1990s, fan attendance has been consistently high. Not rising, but consistently high, with averages of about 30,000 spectators per game. Which, to put it in a historical perspective, if we go back to the 1930s, an average game would draw close to 10,000, prior to the Great Depression, and fewer than that, in fact. And so, this is pretty remarkable, just the sheer number of people going to see baseball games. Not only that, the number of Major League Baseball spectators, it consistently clocks in at about 1/4 of the U.S. population annually. So that means, we're talking about 75 million Americans every year go to Major League Baseball games. And this figure does not include minor league games or college games. So the strike, my point is, did not change the number of people who were going to Major League Baseball games. And I think, in part, that has to do with the consistent quality of the product on the field. In 1995, the year after the strike, a long-standing record was surpassed. Cal Ripken Jr., who played from 1981 to the year 2001, surpassed Lou Gehrig's record of playing in 2,130 consecutive games. And Ripken passed Gehrig in 1995, not long after the strike. To put his record in context, many Major League Baseball players will play more than 2,000 games, and some do play more than 3,000, but just about everyone gets injured or at least needs a day off. Staying healthy in professional sports is incredibly challenging. And not only that, Ripken played shortstop, which is a much more demanding position than first base, where Lou Gehrig played. So he was at a position with more chances for injury, a more physically demanding position, and that makes the record set by Ripken that much more remarkable. East Asian players arrived to Major League Baseball in the 1990s, and nowadays Major League Baseball draws from talent pools in baseball-playing countries worldwide, not just Latin America, but in the East. So the game has never been more international. Hideo Nomo was an excellent Japanese pitcher who played for 5 years in Osaka, Japan, before he moved to the United States for the 1995 season. He escaped his contract. He was signed by the Los Angeles Dodgers, and he was a right-handed pitcher with a deceptive tornado windup. A very interesting delivery to watch. If you're curious, you should look it up on YouTube. And Nomo was a strikeout pitcher, which is fun for the fans. Well, Nomo's success in the United States spurred greater interest in the professional baseball leagues of East Asia, and he paved the way for more Japanese stars who came to the United States, including Ichiro Suzuki, one of the greatest contact hitters of all time, and slugger Hideki Matsui. Around the same time, a South Korean pitcher named Chan-Ho Park pitched well for the Dodgers and excited his home country, just as Nomo generated interest in Major League Baseball among Japanese fans. So Major League Baseball was benefiting from bringing in these Asian players. The Dodgers also signed several Taiwanese players during the 2000s, which meant, among other things, the team needed a translator at one moment who spoke Spanish, Mandarin, Korean, and Japanese. So one of the big stories of the 1990s was the fact that the number of home runs per game per team steadily rose, so that the average game had just over 2 home runs. And to put that into a bit of historical perspective, ever since Babe Ruth came to the New York Yankees, the average number of home runs per team per game had oscillated between about zero point 0.5 or 1 home run per game on average, and as high as 0.9 or nearly 2 home runs per game. And that was the norm for decades until the 1990s, and you had these oscillations. Well, a marked trend occurred in the 90s, and so it begs the question: why did a power surge occur? I point to several factors that I think are critical. First, as I mentioned in a previous lecture, baseball players were becoming more professionalized. They spent more time focused on strength training, working with personal trainers in the off season, and watching video. Second, batters had improved bats with better designs and thinner handles that allowed them to hit the ball harder and further. Three, hitters had learned to hit opposite field home runs. This is something we can attribute to stronger players and hitters crowding the plate. Four, some players started taking performance-enhancing drugs. And so what we can say definitively is that home runs per team per game increased from 0.79 to 1.17 between 1990 and 2000. Sluggers during this period shattered power records, and some players got noticeably bigger. Also, the number of strikeouts per game increased. Pitchers were throwing harder, and batters were swinging harder, hitting more home runs, but also striking out more than ever. During the 1998 baseball season, something remarkable happened. Two power hitters, Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa, got on a pace to break the single-season home run record held by Roger Maris. And by August, it was clear that they would almost certainly do it. Americans, as we know, are fascinated by home runs and power records, so the Homerun Chase became a national conversation topic. Would Sosa get there first? Would McGwire? And I should mention that Sosa and McGwire were nice guys. They were gentlemanly towards each other. They played in the same division in the National League, so there were a lot of matchups between their two teams, the Cardinals and Cubs. And so they were fun to watch. Chase this record that had stood for about 30 years. Well, in August, a journalist noticed a container of androstenedione, or andro, in McGwire's locker, a substance that increased testosterone levels. And he wanted to ask the slugger a few questions about it. McGwire admitted to taking andro, and at the time it was perfectly legal. It was an over-the-counter pill. One could buy in any health food store. So it wasn't an anabolic steroid. However, the National Football League and the World Anti-Doping Agency and the International Olympic Committee had banned this substance. So the bottle raised a few eyebrows. But the country was having a lot of fun with the Homerun Chase, and the story didn't gain too much traction. But it raised questions. What about other ball players? Might they be using illegal substances? And should andro be banned if the NFL had banned it? Well, Major League Baseball refused to deal with these issues until much later, when Congress got involved. One undeniable fact was that certain ball players, such as Mark McGwire, Jose Canseco, and Barry Bonds, all pictured here, were smaller when they started their careers in the 1980s and had become much bigger in the 1990s. Their frames had increased quite a bit. And this isn't to say not all steroids increase bulk. There are different kinds of steroids and different kinds of drug cocktails. Some help athletes recover from injuries. Shortstop Alex Rodriguez, it is known now, used steroids in the middle aughts, and he always maintained a trim, athletic frame. But what we can say is that more players than ever hit 50 home runs or more between the mid 1990s and the mid 2000s. And hitting 50 home runs had always been a rare occurrence in Major League Baseball history. And now it was seemingly commonplace. So more people were asking, was the power surge mostly attributable to the improved conditioning, thinner bat handles? To what extent did drugs, answer this question? Well, it's difficult to know all of the answers because we don't have a precise accounting of who was and was not using steroids. But what we can say is that power records got shattered. Barry Bonds, long before he got huge, was the best player in Major League Baseball. He was a far better player than Sosa or McGwire. He could consistently hit 30 or 40 home runs a season, get on base, and he could steal bases and prevent runs through stellar defense. And Bonds was jealous of the media attention lavished on Sosa and McGwire, the acclaim they had received in 1998, and he felt slighted as someone. He knew he was a better player and didn't feel he was getting his due from the press. So in 1998, Bonds started taking a variety of performance-enhancing drugs that made him bigger and more powerful. And in 2001, he hit 73 home runs. And not only that, a few years later, he would pass Hank Aaron on the all-time home run list with 762 career home runs. And here I want to mention something important about the single-season record. Bonds set that record in October, less than 1 month after the terrorist attacks that killed nearly 3,000 Americans at the Pentagon and World Trade Center in New York City. So there was a state of national mourning when that occurred, and it muted the reaction to Bonds' achievement. And besides, he wasn't as nice or charming as either Sosa or McGwire. The September 11th terrorist attacks were a watershed moment in American history. It led to the U.S. invasions of Afghanistan and the highly controversial invasion of Iraq in 2003. On this topic, I will only say a few things. When Americans went to the ballpark for the remainder of the 2001 season, the national anthem meant more than it normally did. People stood straighter. There was a somber mood nationally, and Americans felt a great deal of solidarity with the people of New York City and brought signs to ballparks and expressed this sentiment that we're all Americans. And briefly, the New York Yankees, where this terrible attack had occurred, became America's team. And the Yankees decided to start playing God Bless America at home games during the 7th inning, something that would be repeated at ballparks elsewhere in the country. So, for a lot of younger Americans, the surge in patriotic feeling was novel. It was deeply moving. And unfortunately, the feeling of national unity and togetherness did not last long. America went to war in the Middle East, and the bitterness and divisions that define our current time are still with us. Well, in 2005, a slugger named Jose Canseco published a controversial book with the salacious title Juiced: Wild Times, Rampant Roids, Smash Hits, and How Baseball Got Big. The book described Canseco's marriages, celebrity relationships, but the most newsworthy aspect of the book had to do with steroids. Canseco argued that steroids were the future of all professional sports. They already were an important part of professional sports, and something to be accepted as normal, so long as players took them under the guidance of a physician. So that's one thing he said. But the book was, the most controversial part of the book was that he named former teammates Mark McGwire, Rafael Palmeiro, Ivan Rodriguez, and Jason Giambi as steroid users. Canseco even said that he had personally injected McGwire with steroids. While Major League Baseball couldn't ignore the book, The players he named vigorously deny the accusations. They defended themselves. Canseco quickly became the most hated man in baseball, at least among players. Then Congress got involved. Juiced was one impetus for congressional hearings that occurred in 2005. The House of Representatives summoned a number of players, including Sammy Sosa, Mark McGwire, Rafael Palmeiro, Jose Canseco, and Curt Schilling to testify. Members of Congress asked questions about what ball players, owners, and managers knew about steroid use. Canseco, for his part, said he believed 80% of baseball players were using steroids. Curt Schilling, by contrast, a pitcher for the Red Sox, said he didn't know anyone who was using steroids. He had never seen someone using steroids. Perhaps it was true, but he'd never seen it. So, and then McGwire, Palmeiro, and Sosa said they had never used steroids. McGwire said, for his part, he wouldn't talk about steroids or the past. And that unwillingness to answer the questions of congressional representatives made him look really guilty, and he did not have a fun time at these hearings. Well, members of Congress expressed worry that young people would use steroids if Major League Baseball players did. They spoke of the importance, the importance of fair play, that athletes were role models, and if you're curious, C-SPAN provides footage of the hearings, so you can go watch all of them if you're interested. Another footnote, Bernie Sanders is a part of the panel asking questions, putting questions to the ball players. I won't tell you what he says during his opening statement, but it's a true testament to Bernie being the same politician he was before the country was acquainted with him 10 years later. Well, congressional hearings forced the Major League Baseball Players Association to accept a drug policy, a new drug policy that banned various performance-enhancing drugs. Still, there was no comprehensive testing program, and the Players Union didn't want one. And the commissioner of baseball, Bud Selig, felt the pressure from Congress, so he appointed a former U.S. senator from Maine named George Mitchell to conduct an investigation into the use of steroids and human growth hormone in Major League Baseball. Well, before he issued his report, and this is just 5 months after these hearings, information came out that Rafael Palmeiro, a great hitter, a member of the 3,000 Hits Club, had tested positive for steroids. And he knew about his positive test when he spoke to Congress and denied Canseco's charges. Well, Palmeiro, he appealed the test result, has maintained his innocence, but his reputation was damaged. And then George Mitchell's report was released at the end of 2007, and it named 89 Major League ball players alleged to have used steroids. Notably, it identified Roger Clemens, an elite pitcher, as one user. Then, so moving forward, eventually the results from a separate Major League Baseball drug test in 2003 that was supposedly sealed, well, the results got leaked to the press. And of the 13 players who hit 40 or more home runs in 1998, 8 were linked to steroids through that test. And that included McGwire, Sosa, Alex Rodriguez, and others. So the net effect of these developments was it forced a much stricter drug testing policy on Major League Baseball. The Players Union had to accept this policy that included banishment for baseball players who were repeat offenders. Since 2007, the Baseball Writers of America have declined to induct former players associated with steroids into the Baseball Hall of Fame, such as Rafael Palmeiro, Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa, Roger Clemens, and Barry Bonds. It's possible that that could change, but for a full decade, the writers have made clear their opinion on the matter by virtue of their votes, their vote totals, and that they view the accomplishments of several stars as tarnished. Well, how should we view this era in baseball history? I think it's difficult because we don't have a precise accounting of which players used and which players did not use steroids. The 1990s slugger came of age during an era of strength conditioning, improved bats, and improved ability to hit outside pitches. So it's messy. Some players probably use steroids habitually. Some may have used them only to recover from injuries. Some players didn't use them at all or used them very sparingly. Some players who used illegal substances are probably now in the Hall of Fame. What I do think is that the court of public opinion has been important. Is a pitcher with 7 Cy Young Awards and who is third on the all-time strikeout list someone who belongs in the Hall of Fame? The answer is yes, if you consider those plain accomplishments alone. But Roger Clemens, like Barry Bonds, got caught up in a judicial process about whether or not he took performance-enhancing drugs. And Clemens vigorously denied all of the allegations from the Mitchell report, despite evidence to the contrary, and it looked for a moment like he would face perjury charges from Congress. And something similar happened to Bonds. Federal investigators hauled him to court regarding a Bay Area lab discovered to have distributed performance-enhancing drugs to professional athletes. And like Clemens, he treated the press and the courts with defiance, with contempt. So 2 of the greatest baseball players to ever play the game ended their careers mired in protracted legal proceedings and lots of bad press. The process tarnished their reputations. They looked undignified, and some would say unworthy of acceptance into a small fraternity of baseball players celebrated by their wider society. So public perception matters. I think people can be very sanctimonious when they discuss this topic, but I think it's clear there was a very real consequence for Bonds and Clemens when they were not truthful to federal judges and Congress. And then, of course, I've said that the whole question of steroids is messy. Before we wrap up, I want to point out that during this era of greater home run production, pitchers still thrived. Sidearm flamethrower Randy Johnson threw 100 miles an hour and struck out batters at the superhuman rate of 12 per 9 innings. And then there were other reasons to like Johnson. He didn't really look like a baseball player standing at 6 feet 11 inches. He was beanpole thin. Hurling the ball towards the plate, he strained with intensity. And many left-handed hitters said he was the most intimidating pitcher they had ever faced. Johnson recorded nearly 5,000 strikeouts in a career that lasted until he was 45 years old. Oh, and one more thing, he accidentally killed a dove that got in the way of his fastball. Look it up on YouTube if you're curious. Another pitcher who had a remarkable career during an age of powerful sluggers is Pedro Martinez. Pedro Martinez was from the Dominican Republic. He came to the United States, learned English, and by the 2000s, he was dominating the American League. At the height of the steroid era, he won nearly 70% of his games. And like Randy Johnson, he finished his career with multiple Cy Young Awards, remarkable statistics. He struck out an average of 10 hitters per 9 innings. And memorably, he contributed to a world championship team in 2004. Well, Pedro Martinez and Randy Johnson were both elected to the Hall of Fame on the first ballot. Their peer, Roger Clemens, has thus far been excluded. Well, what do you think about who should not be allowed into the Baseball Hall of Fame? I look forward to your thoughts and reflections on this topic.